There are questions that aren't really looking for answers. They're fishing hooks disguised as affection, designed to pull you off balance, to make you feel guilty for choosing silence, distance, or freedom. And as we grow older, those kinds of questions tend to multiply, often coming from those who claim to love you but don't understand your journey. Here's the truth. When you finally begin to prioritize yourself, to guard your peace like you'd tend a winter garden, voices start demanding explanations. Why did you change? Why won't you do what they expect? Why dare to say no? And that's when you need more than kind words. You need clarity, calm, and the wisdom to know when to stay silent. In this video, we're going to explore 7 questions you need to learn to face without offering a single excuse. Because your freedom is not up for negotiation, and aging is not a courtroom where you owe anyone a defense. Stay with me until the end, because the final lesson could completely shift how you understand your relationship with others and with yourself. Hi, I'm Gabriel, and this is a wake-up call, a call to reclaim your power, your dignity, and your time. Let's get started. Have you ever been made to feel guilty for choosing peace? Have you ever been met with sad or reproachful eyes when you didn't return a call, when you decided not to visit someone, or simply when you chose silence? There's one question that seems harmless, but carries a brutal emotional weight, especially when it comes from a child, a sibling, a lifelong friend. Why don't you come around more often? This is the first point in today's video, and it's not a random choice. Why don't you come around more often? Sounds like a gesture of love, but often it's a dagger hidden behind a smile. It's a subtle way of telling you you're not meeting others' expectations, that your presence should be a given, as if your time doesn't belong to you, as if your desire to be alone, to protect your space, to preserve your silence, was somehow a lack of love. But listen closely. Real love respects boundaries. And the deepest form of self-respect begins when you stop explaining every decision you make. You are not obligated to justify why you're not visiting someone who asks for your company. You don't owe anyone an excuse for needing space. Sometimes silence isn't absence of love, it's a sign of wisdom. And if at your age you still feel pressured to explain yourself, something's wrong, not with you, but with the script others have written for your life. I'm reminded of a story about Edward, a 72-year-old man I met a couple of winters ago. Edward had spent his whole life as the pillar of his family, always present, always available, always giving in. But one day, after years of scheduled visits, constant demands, and painful silences, he stopped answering the phone so quickly. He started saying no, not with anger, not with resentment, just with calm. One day, his daughter called him and in a reproachful tone said, "Dad, why don't you come around as much anymore?" Edward took a deep breath, smiled on the other end of the line and said, "Because I'm learning to show up for myself first." That line stuck with me, because there's stoicism in it, faith, a quiet dignity that doesn't need to shout to be heard. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is step away, make room, break the cycle of endless giving to finally start receiving in your own silence. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "He who lives in harmony with himself lives in harmony with the universe." But harmony requires order. It requires letting go. It requires learning to say enough without raising your voice. In many families, the older adult becomes the emotional wild card, the one who's always available, who never says no, who sacrifices without asking for anything in return. But that's not nobility. That's exhaustion in disguise. You weren't meant to reach this stage of life still carrying everyone else's expectations. You're here to find the peace you couldn't find during decades of self-sacrifice. And if that means responding with coldness or even silence to that question, so be it. Because sometimes silence is the most powerful way to protect your soul. Don't confuse your worth with your usefulness. You're not obligated to show up where your heart no longer wants to be. Don't feel guilty for putting yourself first. Sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is walk away, even from those you've loved the most. Because if they can't understand your need for quiet, for calm, for freedom, then they're not loving you for who you are, but for what you give them. And if that hurts, let it hurt. Because clarity often grows from pain, and you deserve clarity. You deserve something maybe no one has told you in a long time. You have the right to your time, your space, your chosen solitude. You have the right not to go more often. You have the right to stay silent. And that doesn't make you less loving. It makes you freer, more yourself, more alive. Staying silent in the face of certain questions isn't surrender, it's a declaration. It's a way of saying, without words, that you're no longer available to repeat the patterns that once drained you. Just like silence in response to demands for your presence can be an act of healing, there's another question, just as common, just as intrusive, that deserves the same cool, calm response. We've reached the second key point of this video. What do you spend your money on? It doesn't matter how many years you worked, how many bills you paid, how many sacrifices you made. To many people, even within your own family, the money you have now is still seen as a shared resource. Or worse, something you should have to justify. It's common for children, grandchildren, or close friends to start scrutinizing your financial choices in a way they never used to. They ask what you're buying, why you're buying it, and whether it's really worth it at your age. As if your money no longer belongs to you, as if every dollar you spend requires their stamp of approval. But here's a truth I'll tell you plainly. You don't owe anyone an explanation for how you choose to enjoy what you earned with your time, your effort, and your wear and tear. Because money doesn't just buy things, it buys freedom, time, well-being, and most importantly, dignity. And if you've reached this stage of your life with any stability, it's because you made sacrifices, because you put others first for years. So why should you feel guilty now that you're finally spending it on yourself? Stoicism doesn't reject money, it simply puts it in its place. Seneca taught that true wealth lies not in accumulation, but in needing little. But there's a difference between needing little and living in emotional scarcity. Some will tell you to be cautious, to save for the future. And yes, there's wisdom in being prepared. But there's a very fine line between planning ahead and living in fear. When every purchase is followed by guilt, you're not saving, you're abandoning yourself. You're letting the fear of losing what you have outweigh the joy of giving yourself something now. I remember Ramona, a woman I met in a writing workshop for older adults. She'd saved diligently for decades with near-military discipline. Her children constantly told her, "Don't spend too much, Mum, save for emergencies." And she did, obediently. Until one day, with tears quietly building in her eyes, she admitted she had never traveled, never bought the instrument she loved as a young woman, never signed up for a single art class. "I always saved in case something happened, and the only thing that happened was my life." That line broke me, because it wasn't just about money. It was about lost time, postponed dreams, inherited fears. When someone asks what you spend your money on, what they're really asking is whether you're still willing to follow the unwritten rules of sacrifice. But you are no longer obligated to be anyone's safety net. Not with your body, not with your energy, and not with your money. The gospel speaks of good stewardship, yes, but also of the joy of multiplying what we have, not to hide it, but to celebrate it, to use it in the service of a full life. If you decide to spend on a short trip, a special meal, a new hobby, a better mattress, an online course, or even something that makes no practical sense but simply brings you joy, you have every right to do so, and you don't have to justify it. Because living with dignity also means giving yourself pleasure, joy, and space. Too many older adults are trapped in an invisible prison built from others' opinions and the fear of being judged. This isn't about wastefulness. It's about using your resources as tools to nourish your mind, body, and spirit. About letting go of the idea that every dollar is a ticking time bomb and starting to see it for what it truly is, the fruit of a lifetime of work. You have the right to spend it without asking for permission, without explaining yourself, and without feeling selfish. Because, if not now, when? True poverty isn't found in an empty bank account. It's found in a life without pleasure, without choices, without freedom. So the next time someone questions your financial decisions, remember this: your money doesn't define your worth, but it can help you live with the worth you truly deserve. Stay silent, smile if you need to, and keep moving forward, because you're not here to be anyone's vault. You're here to live with peace, with purpose, and finally, on your own terms. If you've made it this far, you're probably feeling that mix of anger and clarity that comes when you realize how often you've lived for others without ever truly inhabiting yourself. First, they say, you should be more present. Then, they question your financial choices as if your freedom needed their permission. And now comes another question, wrapped in concern but heavy with judgment. Don't you feel lonely living like that? This is the third key point in today's video, and here's where things start to shift. Because this is the question that hurts the most, but also the one that sets you free when you learn to face it without fear. Imposed loneliness is a prison, but chosen solitude can be a monastery, a sacred refuge where, at last, you can hear yourself without interruption. The key is knowing whether you're alone because others left you or because you finally had the courage to draw a line. Society romanticizes aging surrounded by loved ones, a house full of grandchildren, a long dinner table with family gathered around. But the reality for many is different. Many of you sleep in silence, eat in silence, and wonder in silence if that makes you less worthy. And the answer is no. Solitude doesn't diminish you, it reveals you. From a Stoic perspective, being with yourself isn't a tragedy, it's an opportunity. Epictetus said no one can harm you unless you allow them to, and that includes the poison of other people's opinions. When someone throws that pity-laced question at you, don't you feel lonely living like that? The real answer isn't spoken, it's lived, because you can stay quiet and still prove with your life that calm doesn't need an audience, that peace doesn't always come from company, and that being alone isn't the same as being abandoned. The strategy here is simple but powerful. Turn empty space into sacred space. Don't fill your time with the first thing that comes along just to avoid the echo of silence. Fill it with what lifts you up. Choose a routine that reminds you you're alive, not just existing. Maybe it's an evening walk while listening to music that inspires you. Maybe it's writing one page a day of your thoughts. Maybe it's lighting a candle and reading a psalm, an old letter, or just watching the sunset. Any of these acts done with intention can turn solitude into a form of reverence for your own soul. Think of a monk's cell. From the outside, it looks like isolation. From the inside, it's a temple. And you can do the same with your life if you stop trying to fill the void with people who no longer bring you peace. The question isn't whether you're alone, it's whether you're at peace. Because the truest companionship, the one that never leaves, is the one born from being at ease with yourself. Don't wait for the world to understand you. Love yourself. Respect yourself. And when that uncomfortable question comes, don't respond with defenses. Respond with presence, with action. With a life so peaceful, it needs no explanation. If this message resonates with you, I invite you to subscribe right now and give this video a like. That's how we keep growing as a community and sharing reflections that matter. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from and write this affirmation I want you to repeat to yourself every day. I enjoy my own company. There are still deep lessons ahead, and the last one could completely change how you see your relationships, your choices, and your future. Stay with me, because the most important part is still to come. The kind of silence that comes from serenity is one of the greatest achievements of maturity. When you stop fearing solitude and turn it into sacred space, you begin making decisions from a place of truth, not from a place of need. But it's precisely in that moment of clarity that another trap appears. It's more subtle, more disguised, and many don't see it coming until they're already caught. It's the question that sneaks in like innocent small talk, but is loaded with judgment and suspicion. So what are you going to do with your life now? This is the fourth key point in today's video, and I'm bringing it up because it's one of the most common mental pitfalls that paralyzes people over 55. The belief that you need a plan that others approve of in order to justify your existence. When people ask you that question, they're usually not interested in your dreams or your inner search. What they really want to know is whether you still fit into their idea of what's useful, understandable, or normal. And the worst part? Sometimes that question doesn't come from outside, it comes from within. You repeat it to yourself in silence. What am I supposed to do with my life now? And if you don't have a clear answer, shame creeps in, as if being in a state of exploration were a flaw instead of an act of courage. This mental trap is devastating because it implants the idea that at your age, you're no longer meant to explore, to reinvent yourself, to start again. That if you didn't do something before, it's too late now, that you should stay still, comfortable, resigned. But that's a dangerous lie. Life is not a straight line with a tidy beginning, middle, and end. It's a series of curves, pauses, and late awakenings that, if embraced, can become the most authentic parts of your existence. The mistake isn't in not having clarity, it's in thinking you owe the world an explanation. That's what chips away at your autonomy, planting doubt about whether you're doing the right thing by signing up for a class, moving to a new place, ending a long-term relationship, or picking up an old project again. People look at you sideways, they judge, and you start wondering if maybe, just maybe, they're right. That's when you give away your power. But hear this. Stoic philosophy doesn't ask for a perfect plan. It asks you to be in harmony with what you can control today. Marcus Aurelius didn't have all the answers, but he had clarity on what matters most. Live with integrity, with purpose, and without needing approval. Do what is yours to do with diligence and let the rest go, he wrote. And that applies to this stage of your life too. You don't need to justify your choices. You need to live them. When you let that question, so what are you going to do with your life now, dictate your path, you start living outward. You stop asking what truly feels right for you and start designing a life that seems logical to everyone else. It's a form of inner exile. And the most painful part is, you can spend years trapped in that prison without realizing it. Until one day, maybe you get sick, maybe you lose someone, maybe you look in the mirror and don't recognize yourself, and you wonder how you ended up there. But you don't have to wait for that day. You can wake up now. You can reclaim that question and make it your own, not out of judgment, but out of possibility. What are you going to do with your life now? Whatever you choose, even if it doesn't have a clear shape yet, even if no one else understands it, even if it changes along the way. Because living with soul doesn't require a map, only willingness, faith, and the courage to take the first step. And if someone else throws that question at you with a tone of doubt or superiority, stay silent. Let them talk. You keep building. Because what unsettles the world the most isn't when you explain your choices, it's when you live without asking permission. That's what truly rattles people, and more importantly, that's what inspires. Some phrases hurt more when they come from someone close, because they don't just question your decision, they question your right to decide. One of those phrases, common and dangerous, shows up when you dare to do something different, when you mention a long postponed dream, when you finally break free from the routine others have built around you. That's when someone, with a mix of pity and skepticism, says, "Don't you think it's a little late for that?" This is the fifth point in the video, a deadly trap disguised as common sense. Because nothing kills dreams faster than the belief that time no longer belongs to you. That phrase, repeated like an echo for years, doesn't come from truth. It comes from fear. Fear of failure, fear of being exposed, fear of looking ridiculous. But the worst part is that it doesn't always come from the outside. You carry it inside, and that's what makes it so destructive. Because when you start believing it's too late, you don't just stop trying new things. You resign. You dim your own light. You become a spectator in your own life. And that's far too high a price to pay just to meet someone else's expectations. Holding on to that mindset has real consequences. You don't just lose the joy of living, you lose your sense of self. You lose the respect others had for you. And worst of all, you become emotionally dependent on those around you. Because when you stop believing in your own potential, you start living through others. You wait for your children to succeed, your grandchildren to be happy, anyone, to give your life meaning, instead of creating that meaning yourself. And that's a quiet kind of emotional suicide, a slow surrender disguised as maturity that leaves you empty inside. But you're not doomed to stay stuck. Change isn't easy or fast or comfortable, but it is possible. And it begins in an uncomfortable place, admitting how many times you've lied to yourself, how many times you've said it's too late just to avoid the effort, the discomfort, the risk. The truth is this: there's no age limit for starting over, but there are consequences for not trying. Life doesn't wait. And when you don't act, others choose for you. It's that simple, that brutal. The mindset you need now isn't that of a starry-eyed young person who wants everything. It's the mindset of someone wise, someone who's already lost a lot, and because of that, refuses to lose themselves. You need to look at the clock not as a countdown, but as a wake-up call. Every day you don't do something for yourself is a day you give away to fear. And believe me, fear never says thank you. It only asks for more. Seneca once wrote, "It's not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it." And that's not a comforting thought, it's a warning. Because while you hesitate, wondering if it's too late to learn, to travel, to love, to heal, others your age are already doing it. The difference isn't in their legs, their health, or their finances. It's in their mindset, in their decision not to let a calendar decide their destiny. So when someone tells you it's too late, look at them with compassion. And when that voice comes from inside, look at it with resolve. Because as long as you're breathing, you can move forward. There is no greater act of rebellion than doing what no one expects of you anymore. There is no greater freedom than ignoring someone else's timelines. And there is no greater dignity than rising once more, this time for you, because it's not too late. It's now or never. When someone tells you it's too late, what they're really saying is, settle, stay on the sidelines. Don't disrupt the system they've built without you. But you weren't born to settle. You didn't come this far, through everything you've lived, just to give up now. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. The time you have left isn't the problem. The problem is how you use it. And that brings us to the sixth point in this video, one of the hardest truths to face, because it touches on something nobody wants to admit. Aren't you planning to leave something for your kids? That question, often asked gently, even innocently, is really a test, a way of seeing how much of that old role you still carry, the provider, the self-sacrificing parent, the person who lives for everyone but themselves. It's a question rooted in cultural inheritance, in outdated beliefs, in the idea that your worth is tied to what you leave behind materially. But what happens when you realize you've spent years saving, holding back, postponing your own desires, to leave something that may never be appreciated the way you hoped? What happens when, deep down, your children don't need your money or your things, but a version of you that no longer exists because you slowly silenced it over the years? I want you to try this visualization. 10 years have passed. You're sitting in your house, a quiet house filled with objects you no longer use, rooms you maintain with robotic routine. You've saved, denied yourself pleasures, said no to trips, to hobbies, to experiences, all in the name of leaving something. And in that moment, sitting in your armchair, your health fading and the calendar worn thin, you realize no one is coming to thank you. No one's knocking to say they value your sacrifice, because life moves on. Your children have their own lives, and maybe what they needed most from you wasn't an inheritance. It was your presence, your joy, your boldness, and you, thinking you were doing the right thing, realize you never truly lived. You treated yourself like a resource, not a person, someone worthy of pleasure, mistakes, and experience. That room, filled with things but empty of meaning, doesn't have to be your future, but it could be if you stay trapped in this logic of legacy without life. Seneca was clear. The wise man saves not for his heirs, but for his peace. Because the real legacy isn't in the stuff, it's in the example, in showing that it's possible to grow older with dignity, with courage, with joy. What's the use of a full bank account if your soul is emotionally bankrupt? What's the point of leaving behind a house if it never felt like home? What's the purpose of accumulating if you never shared any of it with yourself? When you live to leave something behind, you forget to live. And that doesn't just harm you, it sends the wrong message to those who follow. It teaches them that life is about hoarding, that aging is about silent sacrifice, that freedom is something to delay until it's too late. Is that really how you want to be remembered? The answer isn't about justifying yourself to others. It's about giving yourself permission to break that chain. You are not obligated to leave behind anything more than your experience, your wisdom, and your brave example of carrying on. And if someone demands more from you, respond with your life, not with explanations. Because leaving an inheritance can be noble, or it can be another form of slavery if it comes from fear. Don't let anyone turn you into a living savings account, because if you don't choose yourself now, no one else will. If the last chapter made you uncomfortable, it's because it touched a nerve you might have been avoiding for years. And that's a good thing. It means there's still time to shift course, not to break away from those you love, but to stop betraying yourself. Because you weren't born to become a figure everyone respects for what you give, but no one values for who you are. And that conflict, that dissonance between who you are and what others expect, becomes even more obvious in the seventh point of this video. It's a question many fear hearing. Why have you changed so much lately? That phrase, even when it sounds like casual curiosity, is often the reaction of those who feel they're losing control over you. Because when you start saying no, when you set boundaries, when you stop explaining every move you make, when you choose dignified solitude over the noise of constant demands, when you decide that the money you earned is yours to enjoy, the world gets uncomfortable. People look at you like you've broken some unspoken contract, as if growing older meant permanent submission. but it doesn't. Change is not betrayal, change is awakening. They're seeing you differently because you're no longer willing to lie to yourself, because you've begun to reclaim a voice that was muted by years of other people's expectations, of duties accepted as unchangeable truths. They're seeing you differently because you've stopped pretending, and for many, that's a threat, because your transformation forces them to look in the mirror, to ask themselves why they haven't dared to change, why they're still trapped in the character others wrote for them, and you're not. Here's the truth. Not everyone will understand you. Some will pull away. Others will criticize you. Even those closest to you may try to bring you back to the old version of yourself, the one that was more convenient, more obedient, more predictable. But you're not in this stage of life to please anyone. You're here to be free, and if that means seeming different, so be it. Transformation isn't something you explain. It's something you live, and those who can't accept it can watch from a distance. Take a clear, honest look at what you've allowed into your life. Think about how many times you stayed silent, out of fear, out of guilt, out of habit. Think about how many times you gave up what you truly wanted just to avoid making others uncomfortable. And now look at yourself again. Look at who you are today. Are you closer to yourself or further away? Because in the end, that's what matters most, whether you're living in alignment with who you are and who you've decided to become. Age doesn't free you from making decisions. On the contrary, it demands more responsibility. You can't keep blaming others. You can't keep saying, "They won't let me," or "It's always been this way." That no longer works. That no longer protects you. It suffocates you. You seem different because, for the first time, you're starting to look like yourself. And that process hurts, yes, but it's also the bravest thing you'll ever do. You don't need permission. You don't need to explain yourself. You just need the courage to keep going. Because what's coming, if you stay true to this change, isn't loneliness or loss. It's freedom. And freedom, once it arrives, is not something you bargain for. It's something you honor and defend. If you've made it this far, it's no coincidence. You're one of those who refuse to settle for the comfortable version of life or for the kind of speeches that dress up resignation as wisdom. You've listened to hard truths, faced uncomfortable questions, and had the courage to look inward without flinching. That's not something everyone can do. Because for many, growing older becomes an excuse to stop fighting, to go silent, to mold themselves into what others expect. But you're here, and that means you're still willing to question, to rebuild, to wake up. What comes next isn't a promise of comfort, it's a choice of character. Either you keep pretending everything's fine while you slowly fade inside, or you choose to live this stage with fierce clarity, with a calm that needs no explanation, and with a strength that only comes when fear no longer rules you. The Stoic Garden doesn't exist to entertain. It exists to remind you that your dignity, your autonomy, and your time are worth more than anyone's approval. That silence can also be a form of wisdom, and that you don't have to justify who you are, what you do, or how you choose to live your days. I'm Gabriel, and I created this space for those who are no longer willing to carry what doesn't belong to them, for those who've realized that aging isn't surrender, but a brutally honest opportunity to begin again. If this video stirred something in you, write it down. Tell me where you're watching from and leave this phrase in the comments. One I want you to carry with you every single day from now on. My silence is my power. Not so the world can applaud you, but so you can remind yourself that your worth isn't in the noise you make, it's in the truth you stand in. Subscribe now. Don't put it off. Join this community of men and women who've chosen to live awake, without excuses or fear, without waiting for permission to exist. And if you know someone who's stuck in the wrong questions, someone who needs a jolt to remember their worth, share this video with them. They may not thank you right away, but one day they'll understand the gift you gave them. And if you want to keep going deeper, don't go just yet. Here are 2 more videos that might change how you see time, relationships, and your place in this world. Because this doesn't end here. This is just the beginning.